Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Amouyel, Executive Director of MIT Solve. Welcome to our second installment of Solving from Everywhere, our new speaker series. We are thrilled to host an incredible group of speakers today on the topic of moral leadership to solve world challenges. And this is most relevant during these times of crises. For those of you who may be new to Solve, welcome. Solve is an initiative of MIT, and our mission is to drive innovation to solve world challenges. We host open innovation challenges. We find, fund, and support social entrepreneurs that we call Solver Teams and connect them with a community of members who can support them further to scale their impact and their work. We hope you enjoy today's introduction to Solve's community of entrepreneurs and social impact leaders. To our members and Solver Teams, welcome back. It's lovely to see so many familiar names popping up on Zoom. Solve is lucky to count so many incredible foundations, corporations, and nonprofits as members, and this community has grown to over 120 member organizations who achieve their social impact goals through partnership with Solve and our Solver teams. They provide funding, employee support, in-kind resources, thought leadership, and strategic partnerships. In fact, in the first part of today's session, we will hear a conversation between 2019 Early Childhood Development Solver Sindhuja Jeyabal, the co-founder and CTO of Dost Education, and Solve member Anna Bertmar Khan, acting director of programs for Dubai Cares. And that conversation is about how their partnership allowed Dost to adapt and scale during the COVID-19 pandemic. Then stay tuned to hear from Jacqueline Novogratz, the founder and CEO of Acumen. Under Jacqueline's leadership, Acumen has invested over $128 million to support over 130 social enterprises across Africa, Latin America, South Asia, and the United States. We're excited to have you join in on the conversation too. After we hear from Sindhuja, Anna, and Jacqueline, we'll close out the day and bring everyone back on stage for an audience Q&A. For those of you who are new to Zoom webinar format, take a look at the bottom of your screen. You'll see the Q&A button. As questions for any of our speakers come up during the next hour, feel free to input them there or on Twitter using the hashtag #SolvingFromAnywhere. You can also upvote your favorite questions, and we'll try to get as many as we can. So, without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce Anna Bertmar Khan, a longtime Solve member and the acting director of programs at Dubai Cares, an organization committed to ensuring inclusive, equitable, and quality education for children globally. Thanks for joining us from the UAE, Anna.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's exciting to be on this conversation and be part of it tonight, and really grateful to have so many people online this evening with us that are part of the MIT Solve ecosystem. I wanted to start our conversation tonight.
Oh, I need to introduce Sindhuja very quickly as well. Anna, sorry.
I was just going to get to that, please, Alex.
Yeah. I'm also delighted to welcome Sindhuja Jeyabal, the co-founder and CTO of Dost Education, a tech-driven, peer-led support for parents to turn their homes into early learning environments. She's a Solver team from the 2019 Early Childhood Education Challenge, joining us from San Francisco. Welcome, Sindhuja. And then, so thank you both for joining. And then I'll leave Anna and Sindhuja to be in conversation for the next 8 or so minutes. And then I'll come back to the conversation with Jacqueline. Have fun, happy solving.
Thank you, Ella, for the introduction. Hi, Anna, and hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
Everyone could probably tell that I was super excited to start the conversation with Sindhuja and jumped ahead to try to get her online immediately. Sindhuja and I had a conversation earlier about the work that she is the creator of and co-founder of an incredible organization called Dost, which means friend in both Hindi and Urdu. I just have to start, Sindhuja, to ask you just briefly, what does Dost do and why parents?
Yeah, so Dost means friend, and we wanted to be the parents' friend in their journey to support their child's education. And what we do is we want to reach parents irrespective of where they are, to offer them with tactical tips that are research-based and evidence-based that they can use readily at home to start supporting their child right from when they are young, which is 0 to 6, when brain development is at its highest. And the way we do that is through a phone call program, so we can reach parents who don't have access to internet as well. And the reason we started with parents, it's like I grew up in India. Like I come from a family where I think education was always considered the most important thing for you to be like education equal to independence was what I was taught growing up. And that was something that was told to me every day by my parents. And they were the ones who supported me to really go out and pursue my dreams. And around like what I saw around myself was also parents from everywhere, they were all motivated to give the best for their kids. Like they are the strongest stewards for their children and they want their kids to be happy and successful. So that's like, we wanted to be like, okay, here is a motivated person who wants the best for a child. Can we provide them with some support so they can be the champion for the child throughout their journey? And that's from where Dost started. And we want to kind of level the playing field for all parents, irrespective of the resources they already have or they have been exposed to, and provide them with that.
So the people you reach, the people you engage with, the people that Dost is a friend of, are they parents in low-income contexts in India only, or could you describe who your main issues are?
Yeah. So we've started with parents, reaching out to parents who are in low-income families in India. So they would typically be migrant workers in India, and others who have blue-collar jobs. They might be factory workers, and mothers might be either stay-at-home moms or seamstresses or domestic help workers. So we are speaking about people in peri-urban and rural areas in India who typically do not have access to quality early childhood education or quality education specifically because they haven't been to school. Most of them haven't been to school themselves. Many of them, let's say, have less than 5th grade education themselves. So those are the parents that we are working with. But then again, like I mentioned, we've just started with India. And as we started working on supporting Indian families, we quickly realized it's a global problem. And parents everywhere are continuously looking for those resources to support their children. And so we hope one day we'll be able to support parents everywhere in the world. Yeah.
And what are you most proud of so far? What is the challenges that low-income parents face when they care for children under 6? What are the issues they would like to address, and are you most proud of having helped them address at this point in time?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned earlier, if you speak with any Indian parent, low income, any income, let's say, what they would want is, again, I want my child to be happy and have a great life. And if you speak to a low income parent, like they're typically they would say, I want my child to have an office job, which would be they have to go into the office and have a stable job and not constantly be looking for where do I get my next salary from, right? So that's the dream, and that's the long-term dream. But then while that's there, on a day-to-day basis, they are struggling with how do I make that happen? Like they struggle with things like, oh, but my child doesn't listen to me. What kind of school do I put my child in? Like, how do I even ensure this is happening? So it kind of happens that parents outsource education to the school system and they just like stay away from it, thinking, oh, I've handed it over. It's twofold. One, not knowing what to do, to not having the confidence because they themselves haven't had those experiences. So these are the two problems that we are tackling in terms of how do we give parents who haven't had these experiences themselves the confidence that they can be a part of the child's education. So we think like parental education and parental engagement are two separate things. And a parent who does not have grade school education can still be very much involved. And what we've been able to do is provide them with those tactical tips on conversations you can have with your child, the activities play activities you could do at home with a 2-year-old. Like it could be things like how can you blend learning while you're making dinner at home by making rotis of different sizes and teaching big and small to a 2-year-old, or using drawings to speak about emotions, which are typically not spoken about in families that we work with. So these are just translating evidence-based research into everyday parent problems. So parents are able to live their day-to-day lives doing these activities while also imparting something that's needed for the child's education. And what I'm the most proud of is doing this, the parent and the child have been able to form a bond doing these activities together. I think a lot of I've heard from a lot of parents. I'm not a parent myself, but then I've heard from a lot of parents that the time they spend with their child is the most precious, and that's what creates the bond, and that's what we hear from our parents as well about one child who remarked how a mom singing to the child while bathing the child just made them so much more closer. And the child was like, "Mom, I didn't know you could sing." Like, or sing me a song today. And they're just like started having a much more, and we know how songs and speaking just builds the child's vocabulary in the early years. So it's all rooted in research, but transferred into something that a parent can do at home. So we're just proud of creating these moments for parents and children.
Thank you. That's a beautiful story you're sharing. I mean, I'm one of those parents that outsource my children's education to external institutions, and I'm a terrible singer. So I wanted to ask you, what have you learned as Dost during the very strange times we live in the COVID-19 pandemic, where so many parents and so many kids, especially the very young, continue to be enclosed, but in a much more almost semi-permanent basis? What have you learned are the needs of parents, and how has Dost been able to address those needs? Can you share some of your learnings?
Yeah. So I think the last few months have been crazy, to say the least, for all of us. And we are still trying to figure out what it means for us. And we're still dealing with a lot of it, right? And it's especially hard for the families that we are working with, because like I mentioned, many of them are migrant workers, blue collar workers who've lost their jobs or do not have the same. There's so much uncertainty around their livelihood. There's undue stress on all the families, and everyone is like, there's just so much stress, and children are also experiencing these stresses. Most families live in one room homes where 5 to 6 people are cramped up, and we've also seen increasing incidents of domestic abuse happening in the family. So there's just a lot parents and children are dealing with. Just address this, we realized while we do early learning and parent-child engagement, we should focus on addressing stress for families and really building resilience. So as part of that, we've put together a mental health resource program, and we are also connecting parents to employment and livelihood resources that they can access. So that's been, and from there, like for children, like wherever they are, playing is the most stress relief thing that kids can do. So combining mental health and connecting parents to resources, along with providing them this tools they can engage children with, has been our way of doing this. And since Dost is digital, even if countries are locked down, we've been like able to partner with many strong organizations to take our program to, from earlier we were in Delhi to now we'll be launching with 5 different states by the end of this year. So we are hoping to get the program to more and more people and really work on building resilience and providing parents with tools so they can continue to come out unscathed as much as possible on the other end of this thing.
Thank you so much for sharing this journey, and congratulations for having been able to build more solutions and solve more problems in the face of great uncertainty. And I look forward to hearing more from you during our Q&A tonight or this morning.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah.
Hi again. Thank you so much, Anna and Sindhuja. Wasn't that great, everyone? Don't forget, you can already start submitting your questions for Sindhuja and Anna using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And stay tuned for the audience Q&A. At the end of the session, we're going to bring Anna and Sindhuja back with Jacqueline. So without further ado, for our next segment, I'm so excited to introduce you to our next speaker. Jacqueline is a global leader in impact investing, the founder and CEO of Acumen, and the best-selling author of The Blue Sweater, Bridging the Gap Between Rich and Poor. Jacqueline's latest book, Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, suggests ways for today's leaders to navigate the global challenges that lie ahead, which is so relevant. We are delighted to welcome Jacqueline, who is joining us from New York to the Virtual Solve community. Welcome.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks to everyone on the call. And it was so exciting to hear from Sindhuja and from Anna.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today in this virtual world. So let's jump into this. For this series, we're chatting with an incredible group of social impact leaders every 2 weeks at noon. And we'd like to start each week's discussion with a few rapid fire questions. These will be the same questions each week for each speaker. So make sure, to the audience, make sure you do join in to hear everyone's perspective. So to start us off in rapid fire, Jacqueline, what challenge keeps you up at night?
Well, Alex, everything keeps me up at night these days. But it's interesting, you know, Acumen's mission is changing the way the world tackles poverty. And we really focus on increasingly, how do we get the right kind of capital to the right character and support them with the right community? In this time of crisis, given that we've worked with our 130 social entrepreneurs and our 750 fellows around the world for a long time, we know their character. But we need a new kind of capital in a time of emergency. Many of our companies employ thousands of people who, if they lose their job, it says we know the difference between life and death. And so we have had to pivot even our model and raise significant grant funding as emergency funds so that we could then identify which of our fellows and which of our entrepreneurs not only would be able to save jobs in the short term, but were themselves making the kind of pivot that Sindhuja talked about, which we call the moral imagination, and prepare for this next chapter in history. And so I've been up a lot at night thinking about the employees, the teams, including my own team at Acumen, how to raise the money from the trusted sources, move it with great deliberation. And that's created an enormous amount of change on our team. And also, I've never felt prouder.
Yeah, no, I feel you then. We've also definitely worked with some of our partners to get emergency funding out to our forward teams in these times. And thank you to the Mortgage Family Foundation and Somebody Else's Child Foundation, which notably helped solve with that emergency funding. Okay, second rapid fire question. It's the year 2030. What does the world look like and what are you doing in it?
So just as COVID has exposed the gaps, certainly all the fault lines, and shown that if we do not design systems, and I think this is where there's a real connection between Acumen and Solve, for the vulnerable, for the poor, for the environment, they're too fragile. And this is just the beginning with COVID and health. Our next major challenge, which we're already in it, we're just not focused enough on it, is climate change. And so, Alex, I would say over the next 10 years, as we are trying to work through how to redesign healthcare and recognizing that health is connected to education, to criminal justice, to workforce development, to technology, so must we be integrating a greater focus on sustainability for the environment. Connected to that, I am hoping quite optimistically that we begin to see a shift in leadership models, because we are living in this either or world with a wall between us. metaphorically and also increasingly physically. And we won't solve COVID locally. We've seen what it looks like when one country tries to steal technology from another country. We get into a prisoner's dilemma. And so our leadership models have to be such that we are solving our biggest problems globally and also rooting ourselves locally so that we can deliver it in a more effective way. And then this will also go for not only finding vaccines and then distributing them equitably, but also as we solve problems of the climate and redesign for a world that must put our shared humanity and the sustainability of the earth at the center of our systems, not just profit. Where I want to be in that, as I've watched a generation of young people, young leaders on my team through the whole community that we've been part of and well beyond it, I want to move more into a teaching, a role that can show that change is possible. It is long, it is hard, and that in this next 10 years, we can't be looking for individual heroes. We need to release millions of heroic acts. And I want to be the greatest cheerleader for it.
So I love it. It's a redesigned, healthy planet.
The whole thing is going to be redesigned. It has to be.
Yeah.
The stakes are too high.
Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, for our rapid fire questions, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Look, I can speak for myself, but I believe that inside of me is a bull and a dove. They've always danced with each other. And I wish I had said to my 20-year-old self, lead with the dove, lead with the vulnerable. Start from that place where you can acknowledge what you have to learn, what you have to seek, but know and have confidence in that bull inside. Trust your intuition, move faster. And third, I would say practice courage. Too often we look at people out there who are so capable of speaking truth in one way without understanding that there may be other places where their muscles of courage are not so developed. Practice courage, because there will be a moment when you need a different kind of courage than you were raised to build.
That's thank you. That's good advice for me too, even if I'm not 20 anymore. So thank you for that. So now that we're warmed up, I would like to ask about your new book, Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, Practices to Build a Better World. The book is centered around the idea of moral leadership, something that has obviously evergreen appeal, but seems so relevant right now. So tell us, what is moral leadership for you?
So it starts with the whole idea of what is moral, and it is not righteousness. It is not a set of rules prescribed from some higher authority, Alex, but it is instead those leaders that start by looking to serve others, not simply themselves, and that are willing to hold these tensions between the reality of what is now with all of its ugliness, its mess, without letting go of the audacity of what we can build. To hear different perspectives and acknowledge a truth or even a half-truth in what the other side might believe, so that you can create a place for change, but make principled decisions after hearing these perspectives in service of the vulnerable and the poor and the earth first, so that we can actually create more healthy systems.
Wonderful. There's almost this cognitive dissonance that you need to be able to have this, the bull and the dove, and the reality of this messy world and the rebellion, but also the optimism and the audacity. Even
the way, Alex, we talk about capitalism. Right now we're in the either or, capitalism broken, throw it out. As someone's old enough who I've worked in socialist systems, I've worked in capitalist systems, and it's not the answer just to go one way or another unbridled. The question is, how do we learn to use the best of markets without being controlled by them? So that we control the markets, we control the technology. I think that's moral leadership because it's a lot less sexy. It's a lot harder to build, and it requires navigating gray, which is not something we're seeing in very many of our leaders right now.
Yeah, that is an advice that I give people who want to enter this field, is that there are no easy answers. Unfortunately, it is tough and hard and nuanced in many ways. And to our audience, don't forget to keep writing up questions to the Q&A. We'll spend the last 20 minutes of this session addressing your questions, and in the meantime, I get to continue asking them to Jacqueline. So going back, Jacqueline, to another question. So I think it's very obvious that we're seeing communities around the world experiencing really challenging times right now. There's massive inequalities. There's deep injustice, especially racial injustice. There's obviously a global pandemic, and that pandemic is exacerbating those existing inequalities and injustice. So from the book and from your community at large, what can the next generation do to foster change across the world?
I'm seeing extraordinary things happening, Alex. As social entrepreneurs pivot, in Pakistan, we have a fellow named Sarah Kurram Saeed who had built a tech platform and a series of 26 healthcare clinics so that she could utilize essentially women doctors who stopped practicing once they got married, so that they could use the benefits of telemedicine, but have a 26 center a network where you could have local healthcare workers who could actually be the go-between, given that most low-income rural women in Pakistan didn't want to just use a technology platform. That said, Sarah had dreamed of a sort of a web.com and MD.com type of platform, so she built it anyway and charged a small fee, but very few people used it. When Pakistan went into lockdown, they closed all 26 private clinics. The government thought that it was too dangerous to have all those unregulated private clinics around, understandably. And so she just shifted, and overnight, day one, made it free to use her app. And within a week, they'd gone from 50 consultations a day to over 1,000. As that grew, she reached out not only across the country for volunteers, but then volunteers started coming from the diaspora, Pakistanis in the diaspora, which is not allowed country by country. You have to have registration, certification. So she went to government and got permission from the local government to allow doctors from New Zealand and the United States and Canada. And I've literally watched her reframe, rebuild a much more anti-fragile solution to healthcare in a way that not only includes the poor, but takes advantage of all of these resources that people have and are willing to give around the world. And I see examples like this in every country in which we operate. The big difference for me, Alex, is moving away from sitting in a silo. Every table in Los Angeles as well. It's a restaurant. They have 8 fast food, fast, nutritious, affordable restaurants in Compton, Los Angeles, which is a lower income community. Lockdown happens. Sam Polk, the entrepreneur, says, no way. I'm not, my mission is not profit. My mission is to get people affordable, healthy food in food deserts. And if you want to talk about gout and diabetes and all these underlying diseases and why, why that so often is connected to inner cities, it is connected to food deserts. And so did the same thing, put a tweet out. If you need food, we'll send it to you. If you can pay, great. If you can't afford it, we'll find a way to get it to you anyway. And here's a link for those who want to support it. And the story goes where then government starts putting homeless people in hotels, they partner, and before you know it, he will have delivered 1.5 million meals across Los Angeles. Some of it from a more traditional model, some of it from partnering with rideshare services, some of it from releasing local philanthropists across Los Angeles, and some from partnering with government. I think this is also part of the future that we will see.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and we're seeing that as well among our solver teams. People like Sindhuja, you saw just their solutions were already extremely well placed to respond to this crisis, and others have as you say, I'm quoting you, the moral imagination to pivot and to be at the center, whether it's healthcare solutions, but also education solutions, and pieces around economics, or what we call economic prosperity at Solve. So thank you for those examples. And as you know, the Solve community is all about partnerships and sort of driving partnerships between social entrepreneurs and then people like Anna, but also government, corporations, foundations, and more. What type of partnerships do you think the world needs right now, and what are you seeing that's exciting for the future?
I mean, we need partnership on every level. I think one of the conceits of my generation was that each sector was separate and responsible for one part of society. And even when I started Acumen 19 years ago, many people insisted on giving me economics lessons. You know, I make my money here and I give it away there. And it never made sense to me. It makes less sense to me now that we have to build robust systems for an interdependent world. Why moral leadership? Because we don't have a roadmap for how to do that yet. This is where you go into the gray. But the kinds of partnerships I'm seeing are not just the ones Sarah's building or Sam is building in the US. It's in almost any one of our companies that have successfully scaled in a way that includes the poor, have had to learn to partner with corporations to make their supply chains more sustainable, mostly with governments, and also with individual philanthropists. And I think that you said it before, you know, and this is part of the Dost model, it's going to take all of us to be part of the moral revolution that rejuvenates not just our private sector company, nor just our government, nor just our nonprofits, but we have to rejuvenate, rethink, and renew all of our institutions. And that starts with redefining how we see success and living into that as individuals, and focusing not just what we take from the world and celebrating the takers, but on insisting on giving more to the world than we take from it and celebrating the net givers.
Yeah, I do think that how this pandemic is making us all reevaluate what we're doing within our own organizations, whether we lead them or not, but also within our professional life and also our personal life, and that you know, that concept of moral leadership really has to extend from the institutional to the individual and the personal, which is difficult and fantastic to think about.
Who do we want to be? We can blame everybody till the night is long. Better is to immerse, understand a problem from the perspective of those who are most impacted by it, analyze the structural change that gets in the way, and also be honest about where they might be holding themselves back. Then you can design truly human-centered systems that also respect the sustainability of the planet.
Wonderful. And that's actually a perfect segue to one of my next questions, because we wanted to ask you about this phrase, put humanity at the center of problem solving. And as you know, Solve is all about this problem solving and human-centered solutions. So how can you apply that ethos of putting humanity at the center of problem solving to everyday decisions? What does that mean for leadership, especially in this era of divisiveness and inequality?
It's actually not that complex when all is said and done. I would say there are two tools. One, every morning remind yourself of the problem that you're trying to solve. Too often we end up only focused on solving tactics or how we feel, rather than, my mission is to solve the way the world tackles poverty. That is what I'm here for. And then I want to find fellow journeyers who want to be here for the same thing. When you apply that to capital, which is what Acumen does the most, we have a huge opportunity when I see entrepreneurs that don't confuse ends and means. So they don't start off by saying, how am I going to make the most money? They say, I'm Carlos from Colombia, where we have a completely a chocolate industry that is not working at its potential, nor is it integrating the most vulnerable who happen to live in areas where some of the best cacao or cocoa exists in the world. And so he's driven, just as Sam was driven to get healthy food to people, Carlos is driven to build a chocolate company that can help form an industry that starts with keeping farmers whole. It requires him to break rules, ignore global commodities prices, which is how pricing has traditionally been set, even for smallholder farmers, even if they can't cover their own costs. He starts with the farmers themselves, understands their costs, builds trust and relationship so that they have a company that, lo and behold, does indeed deliver on very high quality with other commercial companies that get on board because their employees and their customers feel better about the work that they are doing. And so I think it really is a very deliberate decision to move away from profit alone at the center of our systems to how we define our shared humanity and the sustainability of the earth. And that requires almost a spiritual stance that we are all connected to each other, to every human being and every living thing on the planet, and that is what should drive us. That's when it comes time for the bull. That's not enough. Then you also need to have the competencies to put this stuff in place and really build viable companies that may not be as profitable in the long term, but in the short term, but in the long term, create the kinds of systems in which we can all participate in and flourish.
Yeah, I love this, and I think you've hit on the sort of real definition of a social entrepreneur, one that asks, when getting up in the morning, asks a different question than how can I make the most money, but instead is really looking to change the system and the world for the better. So thank you, Jacqueline, for this part. We're staying with you, but we're also bringing back our panelists from the previous conversation. So Sindhuja and Anna back to stage, hopefully. And then I'm going to start asking some of the questions that the audience put together. And thank you to Jenny for selecting them for me. So without further ado, Michael has a question for Sindhuja to start with. How might Dost education's approach translate to and support older siblings who often serve as secondary parents while the adults in the household work?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Definitely speaks to the reality of what we see in most of the families that we work with. A lot of the times, both the mother and the father are out working, and usually the older sibling, who might be as old as just 10 years, is the one who's taking care of the younger sibling. And interestingly, like usually these days, the kids are left with a phone at the home. So usually the mobile phone becomes equivalent to the landline that we used to have earlier. And a lot of older siblings actually listen to our activities and also record voicemail feedback, to our surprise, about like they have great things about, hey, I'm taking care of my younger sibling and I'm having fun doing this activity with them, is something we heard from an older sibling, which was such a surprise to us. But I mean, I think that's just like a positive thing to this whole thing. Going back, like, should a 10-year-old be taking care of a 3-year-old? That is an open question. And that's not something we shouldn't be like, oh, we are providing resources to the 10-year-old to take care of the 3-year-old. That's not where we want to be. Like, but then this is a bigger question we have to address in terms of should the 10-year-old be at home? shouldn't the 10-year-old be in school, right? So those are open questions for us as a bigger system to address. But right now, it is building that bond between siblings at the moment.
Yeah, and that goes back to the tension Jacqueline was talking about, the reality of the world, and then really pushing for it to change as well. I think this question's for Jacqueline. So Paige would love to know, do you think an entire restructuring of nonprofits is important to creating more equity? I like the controversy there.
I like it too. I'm never one that says, every nonprofit, because I'm actually seeing so many nonprofits changing. Do I think that we need to step back and be honest with ourselves in very uncomfortable ways about what in the general aspects of the nonprofit sector hold us back? Yes. We have very little consolidation in the nonprofit sector, in part because so many of us, and I would say myself included, I'm not excluding myself from this, when you are moving from a place of scarcity and trying to raise money, competition can push you to control a very limited area. And that is not to the world's benefit. That is not the definition of moral leadership. That is really hard to do by yourself, to make the change, because you're sort of in a prisoner's dilemma. So I would say we need to have more of an ethos where nonprofits are actually clear about the problem they're trying to solve, also clear about making themselves redundant, a clarity around actually building a next generation that's capable of taking leadership forward so it doesn't become dependent on a single leader and a single charismatic personality. We also need to change our funders. Our funders need to change themselves. Let me put that better. And not only make decisions in a more whimsical way on the great story of the charismatic leader, but rather share holding the problem with the nonprofit leadership so that they have a chance of actually solving it over time. And I think that there's a rigidity often that all of us hold too often, where we have little trust with corporations, we have little trust with government, we have little trust even sometimes with our own funders. And so there isn't the kind of honest conversation, clarity, nor even courage of when and how to partner and when and how to walk away. And that these are all skills that we all have access to, but we need to begin to exercise more to create a fully robust sector that will ultimately be able to do much more for the world, and I believe is going to become more important to the world as you see a blurring between the lines of for-profit government and NGO sector in the world.
Yeah, great. I think another question for you, Jacqueline. How can we teach these 2030 leadership models that Jacqueline is speaking about and ensure that enough people reach a leadership position with those skills and the moral compass and courage necessary to have impact? That's a question from Mani.
You guys don't hold punches. Thank you for this question, Mani. I think, first of all, we have to be them. And in being them, it's also recognizing our own flaws, that that moral leadership is not the path to purity. Moral leadership is the path to change. And those are two different things. And so again, it comes to your own vulnerability and audacity. Second, find other role models and find the business models that actually help bring out our better angels and suppress the monsters. Having lived in Rwanda prior to genocide and continue to do work after, what I learned most is that each of us have a monster and angel inside of ourselves, and it's really easy to prey on our insecurities, and that's what turns into the uglier parts of ourselves when threatened. And this is a time when we're all feeling a little insecure. And so what are those role models? We actually have built an academy at Acumen, just one quick plug, called Acumen Academy. which we hope to create as the World School for Social Change. We've had about 1 million signups already from all around the world, where people can take courses in moral leadership, as well as in some of the competencies like human-centered design, like lean data, so that we can begin to measure what matters, not just what we can count from the perspective of the poor. A whole set of structural tools, and then importantly, adaptive tools. And my hope is that we will be able to partner with others who are really interested in the education of character, not just competency, to truly build a community where anyone, anywhere who wants to commit to that path of building a new world where we put our humanity at the center will somehow be part of it.
Wonderful. So sign up to Acumen Academy if you're interested, or of course look at Jacqueline's book as well. So Jeffrey, a question that I'm going to ask Anna and Sindhuja. Where do you see the picture of NGOs and foundations? I'm adding foundations for Anna, Jeffrey, sorry. So where do you see the picture of NGOs and foundation in education post-COVID and the future of education in general? Anna, do you want to start?
Sure. The future of education has to take into account the sustainability of our planet. But it also has to take into account the moral leadership we've been speaking about during this webinar so far. And I'm sure Sindhuja has a lot of examples to share, but one of the things that we who work in the education sector see a lot is parents' need for a new form of education that allows an ancient need to be met, which is to provide their children with a sense of a moral compass. What is the north on that compass? And we have outsourced that to our religious institutions for millennia. And the question at this moment in time, with a world that's so interconnected, is to define how the future of education can provide the know-how, but also the pedagogy from a very early age to create that kind of sense of moral core about gender relations. How do you get little boys to treat little girls well? Moral leadership when it comes to your community, so you don't trash your local neighborhood. Moral leadership when it comes to not trying to steal from others so that you become rich, but you share. And I would love to hear Sindhuja's thoughts on this. And when it comes to the future of education, in the past, it's been, 200 years ago, it was religious institutions who thought about our education and people brought their kids. Then it became very state run, and the modern system of delivering education and learning today is predominantly done by governments through state systems. The inherent opportunity in that is that we will provide equitable access and equal quality to poor, middle income and high income kids. That started to crumble in a lot of societies. So the question is then, what does the private sector, foundations like the one I represented in the Dubai Cares, how can we contribute so that the future of education really fundamentally provides holistic learning, that people come out with holistic education? And I don't think anyone sits on the correct answer. I think these kinds of conversations we're having today that MIT SOL can convene are really key to ensure that different voices come together so that the different perspectives are all heard. But we also have to be honest with ourselves. The future of learning, the future of education, reskilling, getting kids that are today 5 have both moral fiber, but also the skills to enter the 4th industrial revolution without destroying the planet while doing it. That's not going to be possible with little tiny efforts, little foundations, medium-sized foundations, or for that matter, amazing startups. So we do still need to look for leadership in the state structure, in the governments of this world, who ultimately sit on these delivery systems for education. And I think our role as foundations and social entrepreneurs and startups is to is to provide thought leadership, to test stuff, to showcase how you can do things differently, but ultimately to lean in, not lean out, when it comes to the state government delivery systems of learning and education. Provoke those systems to think about the future and not remain stuck in the past. And I find that that's our role. Our role is to provoke, test, showcase new ways of doing stuff, but do so in a very inclusive dialogue with governments to ensure that they continue to tax their citizens, to pay for quality education for all. And that's ultimately where we need to collaborate, all of us. There's no unique role for any one of us. We just have to lean into that big delivery system and make it work much better.
To add to Anna's point on the holistic education, and we've been speaking a lot about how it's not a problem which one person can solve and multiple people need to come together to do that. So one thing that comes to my mind is we were speaking about the education delivery system, and there's power in the system. The power lies with the educators, but not much with the learners. And I wish for a place where we can actually bring both of them at the same level. And I wish education was more social and collaborative, and it's not a one-way street where knowledge gets delivered to the other person and they are just on the receiving end. I just want a future where learners can also have the power to decide to go and pick these different avenues, opportunities being available and learners having the power to choose. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that's a very complete and wonderful picture and vision. We have 5 minutes left for the Q&A. So Akash wants to know, and we'll start with Jacqueline, but I think that question can apply to all three of you. What is the biggest lever to create moral leadership at scale across institutions? So Jacqueline, what's your lever, or what's the biggest lever?
I mean, I feel like I sort of answered that question already. I think it starts by redefining success and deciding who do we want to celebrate in this next chapter, and that then unfolds what we teach our children in our schools. How are we preparing them? I'm on the advisory of a number of business schools. If we say that we want to prepare them to be leaders, and yet we're celebrating the ones that have the highest salaries, well, there's a disconnect. So we have to start by framing what is our definition of success and build from there. A quick story that just connects what Anna and Sindhuja saying, recognizing we each have about a minute. But in Pakistan, just in the province of Punjab, there are 12 million people in the state system, as Anna probably knows. There's another 11 million kids that are in very, very low-cost private schools, and then there's another 6 to 7 million that are in no schools at all. In lockdown, a fellow, one of the Acumen fellows, was given the task inside the Ministry of Education to figure out what we do now, where kids don't have laptops, they don't have Wi-Fi. And so he reached out collaboratively and started with his fellows that do have tech apps so that they could start to build content. But then he also brought in government officials. He brought in cell phone companies and a radio station. And within 10 days, this very unlikely consortium of people who probably never would agree when not in crisis, recreated an entire system outside of silos, where not only are they providing radio, cable television, apps, all ways that young kids can start to access education at scale in a way that's not only reaching the 12 to 15 million, but you're for the first time seeing kids who've never had access to education becoming part of the system. This, to me, that's the kind of heroism and moral leadership that we need to celebrate. So start at the top, build in, as Anna says, the character piece of the work that we do. Don't relegate it to the religion, don't relegate it to the state. It's got to sit in each of us and build it into every school and every one of our institutions. And again, it starts with us.
Wonderful. Anna and Sindhuja, 1 minute. What's the biggest lever to create moral leadership at scale?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, Jacqueline said it right in terms of each of us need to have that within ourselves and speak about it in terms of how it translates into our day-to-day jobs. I think that's the most difficult part about, so there is the moral compass, like the bull and the dove, the monster and the angel. Each of us has that conflict going on within ourselves, and all of us struggle because it's not welcomed to speak about, like, something else is celebrated and something else is what's the right thing to do morally for us. And to just have those conversations and really think deeply about how we could translate it into our day-to-day work actively is important for it to become a reality and for that angel to overpower the monster. Yeah. So I think those conversations and those actions need to be had on a daily basis. That's.
And Anna, last word. Last words.
No, I just, before we started this webinar, we were talking about the way that leadership is sorely lacking at this moment in time in many ways, especially when it comes to addressing the really huge problems like climate change, poverty, etc. And I find that just like Sindhuja has discovered again and again in all her conversations, young people today, I think, are the pivot. They are the lever that will be that will have the skills, the know-how, and the energy to bring the moral leadership back into our understanding, our definition, and our reward systems for leadership. I have to say that we are at a very crucial point in history. I think all generations say that, but I really feel like there's so many things at stake: global public health, the health of our planet, the sustainability of our ecosystems, gender relations, race relations, class societies that need to be dismantled. And I do think that the pivot to real change is going to be in the leadership that young people are showing at this moment in time across the world. And I think people my age, our job is to really listen and make sure that that young leadership is not co-opted by those interests that want to take it in the wrong direction. Whether it's, you know, movements based on racism or movements based on misogyny, or movements based on continuing to extract resources unsustainably. So for us older leaders in the nonprofit sector who have been trying to address big global problems all our careers, it's time to kind of take a step back and just protect and find you know, the food and the hearth for younger leaders to take the lead without abandoning our responsibility. We can't just dump everything on young people, but to give them the space, because I think the combination of technology, information, know-how, and the incredible communication skills that I see in young leaders, and a hunger to do right, I think it's an incredible combination of factors playing into the young leadership at this moment in time. I feel, in spite of all the trouble we're facing, I feel very optimistic.
Wonderful. That's a great note to end on. So thank you, Jacqueline, Anna, and Sindhuja for joining me for Solving from Anywhere today. And to our audience, I hope you enjoyed today's discussion as much as I did. If you'd like to learn more about moral leadership, check out Jacqueline's new book and do support your local bookstores. If you're impressed by Anna and Sindhuja's work, we've provided the links in the chat. But if you're interested in supporting more social entrepreneurs like her and Dost Education, let us know. The Solve team would love to have you join as a member, and there's other ways to get involved too. And of course, join us back here in 2 weeks for the next Solving from Anywhere on July 21st at noon Eastern time with Sarah Geisenheimer, the Managing Director for Innovation at the Rockefeller Foundation. In the meantime, please take a few moments to fill out our post-event survey, which you can find in your email and in the chat. We'd love to hear from you about how we can make the series better. Thank you so much for today, and happy solving.